Hey, everybody. How are you? Everybody have a good weekend?
Yes.
We lose an hour?
You lost an hour.
So did you. Unless
That's
you
true.
live in the alternate universe.
No, I lost an hour too. But I got to watch almost the entire NASCAR race, so Sunday was good. Okay, on Syria. As the Secretary said yesterday in Paris, following his discussions with European counterparts, we strongly support the UN-led negotiations underway in Geneva, and we look forward to their continued progress. We understand that UN Special Envoy de Mistura held some initial consultations already today with both HNC and regime representatives, and I think as you saw, he actually talked about that a little bit. He said that he plans to focus the agenda this week on how to actually implement what has already been indicated and agreed to by the international community. It's worth noting that this week marks the 5th anniversary of the Syrian Revolution, which was really about freedom and dignity. And that spirit endures today with the same peaceful protests that are now ongoing. The first peaceful protests that we've been able to see in Syria for quite some time, and calls for basic rights, reform, and justice that started again 5 years ago. We believe these negotiations represent an important step toward fulfilling these aspirations, stopping the violence and the suffering, and bringing about a Syrian-led political transition in accordance with the Geneva Communique of 2012 and, of course, the follow-on communiques and the UN Security Council resolution. The parties must seize this opportunity. We urge all sides to support these negotiations so that we aren't back here next year or the year after facing a region with even more refugees, even greater numbers of dead and displaced, and even more suffering and erosion of hope. So there's an opportunity today in Geneva, a big opportunity, and the Secretary spoke to that, and we want to see all parties seize it and try to move forward to a better Syria for not just the Syrian people, but for the entire region. With that.
I want to start with, unless someone wants to go.
Did you see the comments by Syrian government officials over the weekend saying that the question of President Assad's future was not up for discussion, notwithstanding everything that you've said and notwithstanding what the Geneva communiques say about a transitional governing authority? What's your reaction, and what makes you hopeful that you'll actually get to an agreement when that's their perspective?
Well, for one, we're not going to react to every comment made by the parties who have the opportunity to speak publicly, and I'm just not going to react to each and every one of them. What I would rather do is point to the fact that they're there in Geneva, that they are being represented in Geneva, and it's beyond dispute that there are still differences of opinion. I think that's obviously very clear to everybody. That's why you negotiate. That's what the purpose of negotiations is all about, to reach a compromise, to try to bridge gaps, to try to see if you can't close some of those seams. Now they just started, so we'll see where it goes. But as Special Envoy de Mistura said today, he's encouraged that he is able to get these talks underway and to have these discussions. So those comments are not unusual. They're not surprising. They are similar to what we've heard in the past. And again, rather than react to every assertion made by each side, I think what we want to do is see how the actual proximity talks go.
Well, does that mean that you disregard this as their opening bid, so to speak, and you expect them to climb down on it? Because they've had this opening position for more than 5 years.
Yeah, I don't know that I would call it an opening position. I think it has, they've said these things before.
So what gives
even before, even when there wasn't talk of talks.
Right, exactly.
So again, it doesn't come as a surprise.
But they say it's non-negotiable, and you say it is. Well, you can't have it both ways.
Again, I'm not going to react to every comment that they made, Matt, or they make, and they will continue to make comments. There's no question about that. But again, I'd point you back to what Mr. de Mistura said today himself, which is that the purpose for these proximity talks are to try to make progress on a transition and a political process that leads us not only to a constitution, a new constitution for Syria, but eventual elections. And that's the whole purpose for getting people at the table. And that's what his expectation is going into it. Now, the regime will have their views, and the opposition will have theirs. We know what the unifying negotiating principles are of the opposition, since they agreed to them in December in Riyadh. And so now we need to let the process go. But the whole purpose for negotiation is to go into it understanding that both sides don't have the same view, and to try to work out compromises so that you can get to some sort of process.
I said that I didn't have anything on Syria, but I just remembered something, and that is Foreign Minister Lavrov, I believe, over the weekend made a comment to the effect of that Russia and its allies would, could, or should, or here's an idea. We, meaning Russia and the Assad regime, will take Palmyra, focus on that, and the U.S. and its coalition should focus on Raqqa. Is that something that you guys are amenable to?
I saw those comments. I don't have anything to add to them except to say that, we've.
Well, I don't want you to add to them. I just want to know if
No,
that's something that you think is a good idea.
I can appreciate that you don't want me to add to it. You'd rather just have a straight stick answer, but I do want to comment on it a little bit, because while I don't have a specific reaction to that recommendation, I think it is worth revisiting the idea, or what we've said in the past, which is that we're not presently, coordinating militarily with the Russians. There is a level of coordination here, obviously, because of the cessation, which makes perfect sense. Like we've long said, if the Russians are going to direct all their military attention against Daesh, then that's a conversation we're willing to have. I know of no, and I would refer you to the Pentagon, but I know of no specific plans right now to divvy up the geography the way it was suggested by Foreign Minister Lavrov.
Have you seen any indication that the Russians and the regime, the Assad regime, have modified their strike plan post the cessation of hostilities?
Well, without a question, we've seen a change in Russian military activity and Russian air operations since the cessation. And I've said that before. Just mathematically, it's beyond dispute that they have made an effort to abide by the cessation of hostilities. And we have seen, in this period of the last 2 weeks, we have seen them take some strikes against Daesh targets. We've also seen and continue to see allegations and claims of violations of the cessation, predominantly against the regime. Again, we're not going to litigate all those in public. The Secretary talked about that as well yesterday. But the short answer to your question is yes. I mean, it's beyond dispute, mathematically speaking, that the Russian aircraft are flying less in Syria, and
when they
appear to be
do-
holding to the principles of the cessation.
Right, you say flying less, but when they do fly, they're flying against and taking
I don't
action
have-
against targets that you would agree with?
I
are
don't have
legitimate?
I don't have a daily analysis of every strike that they're taking or every mission or every sortie that they're flying, but we have seen them let me just put it this way, we have seen in the 2 weeks of the cessation that they have conducted airstrikes against Daesh targets.
John, and just to follow up on that point, if there is some sort of coordination between you and the Russians to retake Raqqa, how would it be conducted? What form would it be? Would it be your air assets, their air assets, ground forces? What is likely? I mean, what are the parameters of that coordination?
I mean, I am supremely unqualified to answer that question, Saeed. First of all, it's a hypothetical, and as I told Matt, there are, at least that I'm aware of, no plans militarily to divvy up the labor in the same with those geographical parameters as suggested by Foreign Minister Lavrov. And as for whatever coalition military support there might be in terms of retaking Raqqa, that's really a question for the Pentagon and for the coalition to speak to out in Baghdad. I just wouldn't be able. I don't have access to that level of information.
I mean, seeing how the last time the Russians and the Americans cooperated in the battlefield was World War II, really, I don't recall any events. How would it take place in such a complex area without
Well,
sort of
again,
being involved?
your question presupposes that it will take place,
Okay.
and
So
I've seen
that-
no
fair
indication
enough.
that it will.
Okay.
I've just seen no indication that it will. I know that I know that coalition planners continue to look at Raqqa, but I'm not privy to the military planning cycle right now, or sort of or what the thoughts are with respect to how you would go after that.
And Matt raised the point that the Syrians may be aiming to retake Palmyra or attack Palmyra, and then maybe possibly Deir Zur, which is, close to the Iraqi border and so on.
Yeah.
Do you have any comment on that?
Actually, I don't know. I mean, I won't. I don't even speak for our military. I'm certainly not going to speak for Russian military.
And my last point on this, also, today there were reports that you guys blamed the Syrian regime for, jeopardizing the cessation of hostilities. You and the French have done that. Is that based on violations or what?
I'm not aware of. I mean, what I think this could be coming from was some comments that the secretary made yesterday in Paris with respect to comments made by by some Syrian leaders about these talks, and I think he said very candidly that that it would be a lost opportunity if these comments, if these going in statements were somehow meant to spoil the effort to get at real meaningful talks, or to torpedo them before they've even started. Now, again, I'd say, I got you. You don't have to jump out of your seat. I got you. I know you want the next one. It's encouraging that they did start, that they are there, and that Mr. de Mistura was able to come out and talk publicly about the fact that initial conversations did get started. And again, they're proximity talks. I understand that. But I think he struck a note of optimism that at least there was a beginning. Now we'll see where it goes. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you. I want to ask about
I'll come back.
the American citizen who was captured by Kurdish forces in northern Iraq and who is said to have been fighting for Daesh. Is the State Department trying to get hold of him?
I've seen reports that an American citizen has been taken by Peshmerga forces, and what I can tell you is we're working closely with Iraqi and Kurdish authorities to try to get more information to confirm the veracity of these reports. I just don't have any additional information right now.
Just, do you know how many Americans are with ISIL right now, approximately?
I do not.
For those Americans with Daesh who want to get out, what's the procedure? What should they expect?
You're asking me to
Americans
advise
who are fighting
Americans
for-
that will be fighting with Daesh.
No, who would like to get out, who would like to defect? What should they expect? What would be the procedure?
I have no idea, and I don't know how anybody could have an idea, or how I could divine a process for defection. What I'll tell you is this. We have long recommended against travel to Syria by American citizens, point one. Point two, we've been very clear that if you go to fight for a terrorist organization, then you're a terrorist. And then you do that at your own peril. Because the one thing the United States has proven time and time again is that we're capable of and willing to go after threats to our country, and terrorism threats in particular, where and when we need to. So you want to go take this up as an occupation. It's a short-lived occupation, and you do it at your own peril. Number three, while I couldn't begin to tell you, and I wouldn't even, it would be beyond the scope of this institution to advise Americans who might be fighting for Daesh sort of how to get out of it. What I will tell you is we do see and have seen over the last several weeks reports of more and more defections from the group that increasingly, for a variety of reasons, fighters are becoming disenfranchised, certainly disenchanted with the effort that they claim they signed up for, and are in increasing numbers deciding to leave the group. And you see that borne out in numbers of ways. First of all, reports that we're getting from the ground that there are more and more defectors, but also that increasingly Daesh is relying on child soldiers. And originally they would rely on children for intelligence streams, getting information, and then then turned to using them to conduct suicide attacks, which they still do. And now we get, more reports about them using, children in actual engagements, side by side with adult fighters. So all those are good indications that they are struggling with their ability to recruit and to retain manpower. I'm not at all suggesting that that we don't still take the group seriously, that they aren't still lethal, that they aren't still capable. We've seen them conduct attacks in and around Baghdad just a week ago. So we're still taking the threat that they pose very, very seriously. But there does appear, at least anecdotally, to be some cracks here in the foundation of their manpower and their resources in that regard. Yes.
This has just been reported, but Putin has apparently ordered, starting tomorrow, the start of the withdrawal of Russian troops from Syria. I don't expect you to have anything to say about it now, but can you take that and see if you guys have any reaction?
Sure, happy to do that. You got that, Elizabeth?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, whether that President Putin has apparently just ordered his military to start withdrawing from Syria, saying they've fulfilled their objectives, and whether they had told you ahead of time that this is the plan, and what sort of reaction, what sort of
You're going to have
impact
to
you
let me
might
take
think.
that question, guys.
Okay.
I did not see that report before coming out here today, so I'm going to have to reserve comment until we have a chance to take a look at it and make an assessment. Let me come back to you, but I already got you. Good, Pam.
It's a
That's
follow-up
okay, I'll come
question.
back.
Has the secretary had any conversations with Lavrov over the past couple of days?
Let me consult the handy dandy phone call list here. The last call that I have showing to Foreign Minister Lavrov was Thursday of last week, and I think we talked about that phone call. It was obviously about Syria, but it was also about Yemen in advance of the Secretary's travel to the region. So,
Let me change topic?
Sure.
Okay. Palestine-Israeli issue.
okay.
Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, today, just a little while ago, reported that there were meetings conducted between the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli government under your auspices, under the American auspices, that was aimed or designed to have the Israelis withdraw from Area A and partially from Area B in exchange for maintaining security coordination between the two and so on, but that apparently the talks collapsed because the Israelis insisted that they withdraw from Ramallah first, then Jericho second, and then the rest of the areas that they took back after the second Intifada. Do you have any comment on that? Are you aware of this?
No,
Could you-
I haven't seen those reports, and I'm not aware of any such talks, as you've put it. We obviously have
Right.
routine discussions
But-
with all the parties about
Yeah.
looking for ways to get the violence ratcheted down and to try to see in place not just rhetoric but actions that lead us to a two-state solution. But I have nothing specific to address with
So-
respect to that.
It wouldn't be out of the realm of reality that talks may have taken place under your auspices.
I just don't have anything on that site. I'm not aware of
But it would not
any
be
organized
completely
talks the way you've described
unusual
it there.
or abnormal that you would actually organize.
I don't have anything for you. I'm not aware of any such effort.
Can we move to Iran?
Iran.
Yeah. So today, the Security Council began discussions about what to do about the Iranian ballistic missile tests, and it looks like you guys are not going to be able to get anything, not even a council statement saying that Iran is in violation, much less a resolution that might impose more sanctions on them, at least international sanctions. The reason being, at least as explained by opponents, is that Iran didn't actually violate 2231 because 2231 calls on Iran not to do this, instead of says that they can't, or
Yeah.
says shall not. What's your take on that?
So it's a good question, and I think you might be referring to comments I think the
Ambassador
Russians-
Churkin.
The Russians said, yeah. So, look, I don't know that it's fruitful to get into a back and forth over the technical meaning of violation. But as you might have noticed, Ambassador Power addressed this very issue this morning. And we are very much associate ourselves with what she had to say, that one, that we're in the process of preparing a report on these missile test launches to the Security Council, and we're going to raise the matter directly at the Council on Monday. We believe the Council's the right forum to have this discussion. And we still remain deeply concerned about their recent ballistic missile test launches, which we continue to believe are provocative and destabilizing. They are also, at the very least, inconsistent with, but more practically in defiance of, the UN Security Council Resolution 2231, which of course codified the Iran deal. So we could have an interesting discussion about the degree to which it's technically a violation. It doesn't mean, though, that it's okay, and it doesn't mean that the Council should look the other way, and it doesn't mean that it isn't that their actions are still not inconsistent with the obligations in that resolution, which calls on them to refrain from that activity. And so we're still going to bring it up with the Council.
Well,
and we still believe we have a strong case on that.
Really?
Yes.
Because, I mean, look, I went back and I looked. 1929, which is what replaced, which was 2231 replaced, at least in terms of the missile technology. UNSCR 1929, number 9, and it says, this is quote, decides that Iran shall not undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using ballistic missile technology. 2231, which replaced it and enshrined the Iran deal, says Iran is called upon not to undertake any activity related to ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering nuclear weapons, including launches using such ballistic missile technology. How is it that you can have any kind of a logical disagreement with what Ambassador Churkin said? You have shall not and then is called upon. And as Ambassador Churkin said, you can't violate a call. You can ignore it, but it's not a violation.
Again, I'm not going to get into a rhetorical debate about
Well, you're going to have
violate
to,
or not violate.
because if you're going
No.
to push this at the Security Council, you're going to have to convince people like the Russians and the Chinese and others that they're wrong and your interpretation is right. And if you can't do that, then you're going to lose. You're not going to be able to get anything through the Security
We're
Council.
comfortable we have a strong case.
Well, no one else.
These
other
launches,
people don't.
these launches are clearly in defiance of that resolution. There's no question about it. And again, we can have you can have a debate about shall not or will not or called upon to not do it or violation or not. And that's great. And I could debate that with you all day happily, and I'm happy to do that. But what I'm telling you is we believe that these actions are not consistent with the obligations that they are called upon to meet in that resolution. And therefore, we have a case going forward, and we want the Council to bring it up and have that discussion. And look, let them have that discussion, and we'll see where it goes. But as Ambassador Power said this morning, and the Secretary very much associates himself with her views, is that there is a case to be made here. Clearly, these are in defiance with that resolution.
Yeah, but the point is that it's very difficult to see how you can claim that, one, the two resolutions say the same thing when they clearly don't. And
I didn't say that the language was exactly
well,
the same.
you had
I
the
did not say
Secretary
it's
and
the
other
same
people
thing.
up on the Hill when members of Congress asked about this language.
I did not say
asked whether this was binding, and they made the same argument that you're making now and that Ambassador Power made. However, the language is clearly different, and so I don't know how you're able to say that they are in violation of something that they're only being asked to do. They're not being told not to do it. They're being asked not to do it. So, your argument, unless you can get into the back and forth of it and make a convincing argument that for why the Iranians should be punished for this.
If we're saying, so you're saying that because the resolution says we call upon them to not participate in any activity ballistic missile related that can lead to the development of nuclear warhead capability,
Yeah.
right? So do you interpret that to mean that sentence means it's okay to do it?
No, but I
Okay,
interpret,
right. No,
hold
no,
on,
no, no.
but wait a second.
No,
But
no,
I
no.
also don't interpret it, if they go ahead and do it, I don't interpret it as to say that Iran is definitely in violation, and because of that is definitely subject to more penalties.
Clearly, you can see, given the language as it's written in 2231, and given their activity, that it is absolutely not
But look, this is
not
what-
in keeping with that language.
But diplomats negotiated this for an hour, maybe not long enough. If you want to, if the case that you guys were trying to make in the negotiations is that they're the same, because they're clearly not the same.
I'm not I didn't do well in grammar, so I'm not going to debate with you over shall not versus calls upon to. But even you admitted that by the language it's written, it wouldn't be okay for them to conduct ballistic missile launches, even by your
but-
interpretation of the
Yeah,
language.
but
So okay,
being
so
okay
let's have
and
a
not being
discussion.
okay is not something that's punishable.
Let's
Because
have a
this is
discussion in the
language
council.
that is important
Right.
for, and it has legal implications.
And that's why,
and
precisely
called
why-
upon does not have a legal implication.
It certainly does in terms of.
It does
in
because
terms-
you want it to.
No, it's not. It's not because we wanted to, Matt. It says that calls upon them to refrain from activity, ballistic missile activity, particularly as related to nuclear warhead capability. We believe that these tests are in defiance of, definitely not consistent with that language, and therefore it is exactly this. No, just let me finish this thought. That is exactly why we think the council should take it up and let the council have this debate and discussion and see where that goes. That's why the
You
process
just
is
don't
set
want
up
to
the
have
way
it
it
here.
is.
You're prepared to have it at the Security Council?
Yes, of
Okay.
course. I mean, Ambassador Power said that.
I want to go back to your words from last week, where you explicitly said, if these reports are true, then yes, they are in violation of 2231. So last week, you argued that it was a violation. Now you're using very different language, that it is not consistent with, or that it is in defiance of. Why did you say it was a violation last week, unless you were certain that it was a violation? And why have you changed the language to not consistent with
First
and
of all,
in
last week
defiance
we
of?
weren't sure whether the reports were true.
But you said if they were true, you were acknowledging that you weren't certain if the
Again,
reports
if
were
you could
true.
just
We're
let me
talking,
finish my answer, I could
Okay.
get this to you, okay?
please, yeah.
As I said, last week we weren't sure. Now we have more information that leads us to believe that they did in fact do these launches. And on a more careful reading of the language, I am being more specific in my answer today. Okay?
Why weren't you, I mean, these are not trivial matters. And
I didn't indicate that it was trivial.
No,
not at
but you
least.
apparently mischaracterized it a week ago, right? You said it was a violation. Now you've looked at it more carefully. You've concluded it's not.
There-
So,
Again, I'm not going to get into debate over verbs here.
but
There's
verbs
no
are
doubt.
important.
There is no doubt that now we know these launches occurred. There's no doubt. Look at the language yourself. You can't
I
sit here
have.
and
I
tell
read
me
it last week.
that given that they've done these launches, that they are somehow in full compliance with their obligations under that resolution. There's no way, there's just simply no way you can make that determination. So I'm not going to debate the verb, okay? I a more careful reading since last week has led me to use the language I'm using today, but that doesn't by any means undermine the argument that they are still not acting in accordance with their obligations.
Verbs are important. And when you adopt a position from the podium that something is a violation, you're speaking on behalf of the U.S. government.
I didn't say it was a violation last week. I
You
said
said
if it was
violated.
true.
If it was true, it violated. You've now concluded that it is true.
And I've also concluded, we have concluded that it is not in keeping with their obligations, and therefore we're going to have the council take it up.
But it's not a violation.
Look, I've answered this question 10 different ways today. Yeah.
Different topics?
Yeah.
Hold on. So, is there a distinction here between what you're saying and what Arshad's question? And not in keeping with, seems to me you think it's a violation still, but I don't know. Maybe.
We believe that their activity, and even you admitted, is not consistent with what they are called upon to do in the resolution.
Right, but
Therefore,
Yeah.
we believe, and since we now determined that these launches did occur
Right.
with ballistic missile technology that they shouldn't be testing, we believe that it's important for the council to take this up. And the council can have this discussion about whether it was technically a violation or not. As I was speaking last week, I didn't know whether, we couldn't even
Right.
confirm that the launches occurred.
No,
So
but-
we'll have the council take it up.
So, in other words, the U.S. is not taking a position now whether Iran violated the
We are
the-
certainly
the
taking a
resolution or not?
position that these actions are, that they are against the obligations that they
Does
have.
that mean violate?
I'm not going to get into the technical definition of violate. Clearly, what they've done here is in defiance of their obligations under that resolution, and we believe the council should take it up.
But see, but the thing is that it does not seem to be an obligation. You're just calling on them not to. So it doesn't, that's like saying, Iran, it would be really nice if you didn't do this.
So the
It's
counter
not-
argument would be that we just ignore it?
No,
Oh,
no,
of
no.
course not. We want to have it taken up inside
I'm
the
not,
Republican House.
I'm not trying to make a counter argument, and it's not me who you need to convince about this.
Apparently
Whether
it is.
whether I think
Apparently it is
whether
you.
I think Iran has violated the resolution or not is completely immaterial to what the
We
argument is
believe-
being made on the
We
other side.
believe that
They
based
did.
on what they've done, there
Yes.
is a case to be made in the council that they are not in compliance with their obligations under that resolution.
Okay, and is it your position then that they violated the resolution and should be subject to additional sanctions?
That is
Or-
a matter for the council to
Yeah,
take up,
but
but
I'm
we
not
want.
asking what the
we
council
want-
thinks, I'm asking what the
I'm not gonna
US
get ahead of
thinks.
the report that we're gonna file. We haven't
Okay.
done that yet, okay? So
So
let's
this
let that
afternoon-
happen. Let's let that happen.
Later this
and then-
afternoon, I can come
and
back and
then
ask
we
the
can
same
talk
thing?
about the details
All
of
right.
what's in our
How
report.
how can you make a case that the negotiators, that the U.S. negotiators at the UN, in changing the accepting a change in the language from the very straightforward "shall not undertake" to "is called upon not to undertake"? How do you make the case that that wasn't a concession?
Because I wasn't in the room when that was negotiated, Matt. I don't know what went into the actual drafting of the language, but I mean, I get the utility of a rhetorical exercise here to try to parse out the language, and I agree with Arshad, frankly, that language does matter. But there's no question when you look at the language as written, what they've done definitely defies the obligation that they have under the resolution, and that's why we think the council should bring it
Except
up.
that-
And I can't speak to
Where does the
how
word?
that
Where
language
does the
was
obligation?
derived.
Okay, where do you get the word obligation from, or obliged? Iran is obliged, or Iran is obligated. From 2231, I don't see that. How
Calls
that?
upon Iran not to undertake any launches of ballistic missiles designed to be capable of delivering
But
a nuclear weapon.
calls
If I
upon.
call upon you to stop asking me these questions,
And
wouldn't
that doesn't work,
wouldn't-
does it?
It's true. It's true, that never does work.
It has zero effect.
So you are in violation of my call. No, but if I call upon you to do something or not do something, I'm clearly stating an intent of the international community for you to not to do something, to comply or not
But
comply.
you would, but it's something.
And
that you
once
would
again, you
like
are
to-
not complying.
Yes, but you would like to see it happen, not something that is.
Let's let the
punishable.
report go up to the council and we'll go from there, guys.
Obviously, we're
Pam.
not gonna get anywhere.
I have a couple on different issues. The first one is, there's expected to be a vote in the House later this evening on a measure that could declare the Islamic State guilty of genocide. The Secretary discussed this in his Hill testimony a few weeks back. First, where is the State Department in terms of coming up with its assessment of whether or not the Islamic State is guilty?
Well, first off the bat, as you know, we remain appalled by the horrific acts of violence being committed by Daesh against people from a wide variety of ethnic and religious groups in Iraq and in Syria. Regardless of whether their conduct satisfies certain legal definitions, including genocide and crimes against humanity, the United States has been clear that our interest in accountability for the perpetrators remains undiminished. We abhor Daesh's heinous acts and are taking direct action to end those atrocities and mitigate their impact through a coalition of some 66 nations across 5 different lines of effort. As they seek to destroy the diversity of the areas that they terrorize, the U.S. government will continue to work to help prevent mass atrocities, particularly against vulnerable religious and ethnic minorities. As the Secretary has made clear in testimony himself, the Department of State continues to collect and evaluate all available information regarding these atrocities. Yeah.
Different topics?
So, do you have anything to say about timing of when this will be done? Or could be
Again,
done?
I would just point you to what the secretary said, that he is working his way through our evaluation, continues to work through and continue to have consultations with the staff here at the Department of State. He said that he expects to reach a determination soon, and I think that's still the case. I don't have any more specific update than
But
that.
I think, Pastor, will the expected House vote tonight have any effect on his thinking?
I won't speak for the secretary to the degree to which he would factor in any resolution voted by the House and put before the Congress. As a former senator, he obviously understands the significance of that process. But I can tell you what he's mostly focused on is making his determination based on evidence and analysis that he's getting from the State Department. And I'll also just say that he is taken very, very seriously, and wants to make sure that whatever determination that he makes, it's fact-based, and that it's adequately reflective of what we're seeing on the ground.
If there is a determination from this building that it is genocide, what's going to be the next step as far as the State Department, the executive branch is concerned?
Well, again, that's a hypothetical, Pam, and I'm not going
I
to
mean,
get
can you
ahead
say
of.
in general what would happen?
I
if he-
couldn't speak to that right now, and I'm not. I don't want to say anything that's going to prejudice one way or another the secretary's own process of working his way through the evidence and the analysis to make a determination. When such a determination is made and we can speak to it, then I think we'll be in a better position to talk.
Can I
about
ask you one on a
that
different
going
topic?
forward. Yeah.
This is on Ethiopia. There is an effort underway. A group of congressmen sent a letter to President Obama trying him to secure the release of Okello Akwe Ochala, who's a former governor in Ethiopia. He was arrested and detained after he spoke out against the government on human rights issues. Wanted to find out if there's a diplomatic effort underway on his behalf, and if so, what's his status?
I don't have that for you. I'm going to have to take the question and get back to you, Pam. Sorry.
Different topics. Thank you. U.S. Navy soldier arrested on Sunday on suspicion for raping Japanese women. Okinawa Prefecture already made a protest, and also Okinawa people worry about the impact for tourism industry. So I need a comment for U.S. government.
Well, look, this is a serious matter, and we take these reports very, very seriously, as does the Department of Defense and the United States Navy. I know that. We certainly have seen these reports of this arrest, and I have to refrain from specific comment because this is an issue that's being investigated by local authorities as well as the United States Navy. What I can tell you is that and I know this for a fact, obviously, the United States Navy takes these matters very, very seriously and will do a thorough job of getting to the bottom of it. And if there's a need to hold someone accountable for crimes like this, they'll do that, and they'll do it in a very open, transparent way. But I don't want to get ahead of it. Obviously, we take our relationship with the people of Okinawa, as with everybody in Japan, very, very seriously. It's a strong alliance. It's a deep and abiding friendship, and we have great respect for the Japanese people. Again, I can't speak to whether or not this crime occurred in the circumstances. I wouldn't do that, but obviously, if it did, it's completely inconsistent with our values and our principles and what we expect of our people overseas.
How does the U.S. Department of State and correspond that matter?
I'm sorry.
And the U.S. military is order of the curfew or change it to the liberty policy.
I'm not sure I
reaction.
understand your question.
How does U.S. government respond to that matter?
Well, again, without speaking to a military matter, which I'm not qualified to do, when reports like this come to light, whether they're allegations or actual, you have an arrest like in a case like this, military law enforcement and our military commands out there, they take it very, very seriously, and they work closely with local authorities to properly investigate the charges or the claims, and then there's a process that goes forward to appropriately, I should say, deal with the allegations, to determine the veracity of them, and then if they're determined to be true, then to properly hold the individual to account. I won't get ahead of reports of this criminal act. It just wouldn't be appropriate for me to do that, especially from this podium. I can just tell you that our relationship with the people of Japan is near and dear to us, and we have an alliance that we are very, very committed to, and we are confident that the Department of Defense will handle this appropriately. Okay.
I'd like to go back to the genocide declaration. Last week, the Knights of Columbus and In Defense of Christians put together a nearly 300-page report on this. Exactly listed 1,100 Christians by name who were killed, churches that were destroyed, rapes, and other crimes against Christians. Can you expand where exactly the State Department is in defining genocide?
Well, there's a legal definition for genocide, but I don't want to get into the specifics of it at this point, given that the Secretary is still working his way through his own determination. And as I said to Pam, he's taken it very seriously, and he wants it to be, he wants to take an analytical approach to this. Based on the best information that's available. Look, there's no question that, as I said in my answer, that this group has and remains capable of violence and atrocities across a wide swath of the population there in Iraq and in Syria, and that Christians have suffered, and Yazidis have suffered, and Shia have suffered. There's no doubt about it that this group continues to be capable of just, raw, pure, brutal murder and torture. But we're going to take this. We're going to take this seriously. And the Secretary's going to take the time he needs to make the best determination possible.
Can you just address the criticism that the administration doesn't want to get involved because of increased military action?
I know of no such. I know of no such hindrance on him or his thinking. I think that I just don't find that claim credible at all, knowing what I know about how seriously the Secretary is taking the process. And again, he's going to do it based on the evidence that's provided to him and the analysis that he's given. I can tell you, he's working his way through this methodically, and he's asking tough questions. And that's what he's going to be focused on, and that's what's going to drive his determination, not potential one way or the other for the use of the military tool going forward. And it's not as if we're afraid to use the military tool against a group like Daesh. I mean, one of the lines of effort that we talk about the most is the military tool, and I'm not predicting anything post-determination. I wouldn't do that. But again, the argument that somehow it's being slow walked or slow rolled because of the likely pressure that it might result in further calls for military action just is baseless, based on my understanding of how seriously he's taken his own determination process. Okay?
Yes, please.
One on this. I got
point.
one on this. When the Secretary was asked about this in his congressional testimony, he was specifically asked a question about genocide against Christians. In your answer just a couple of minutes ago, you mentioned the violence done to Yazidis and to Shia by Islamic State. Is the determination that he is making, that he's studying and going through the process on now, whether they have committed genocide against Christians or whether they have committed genocide at all, whatever the group, Christians, Yazidi, Shia.
As far as I know, it is a determination of genocide.
Okay,
Period.
without regard to what group may have been
As far as I
object
know,
of
it
it.
is a determination of genocide
Okay.
in general.
And then two other
But
questions.
specifically, I mean, genocide has to be directed at a group or
Yes.
groups.
Right.
It can't just be there.
Okay. So genocide against that. Let me put it
Is
another
it
way.
mu-
It's a
is he
determination
consider-
about genocide based on the violence that we see them committing.
Against all religious minorities.
Well, clearly, I've said
Or-
that they
okay.
conduct violence against
Sorry.
many
Do you wanna-
groups.
Do you want to double check that it is indeed just whether they committed genocide against any group or whether it's a specific group?
No, I'm not going to double check it.
Okay,
I
if
know
you're
the
sure, that's
secretary. The secretary's taken a hard look at this, and again, I don't want to get ahead of. I don't want to get ahead of any determination that he might or might not.
But it's against, he's looking at genocide committed against any and all
he's
groups.
he's taken a hard look at the violence they are perpetrating against many different groups.
Okay, and then two other things. You said that you have now concluded and can confirm that these were indeed ballistic missile tests that Iran conducted. Can you be, since there were a series of them, can you be specific about which tests you have now concluded were indeed ballistic missile tests?
These are the tests that were, I believe, conducted a week or so ago. I don't have the exact date, but they were.
There were multiple, though.
two.
It was on, yeah,
There were two that we specifically talked about
okay.
in terms of ballistic missile launches.
Two on two different dates, correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, and then lastly, have you, since you've now determined that those were ballistic missile tests, have you determined whether the devices tested or the activities undertaken, because the resolution is kind of broadly defined, could lead to, were either missiles capable of carrying or delivering nuclear weapons, or could be activities that would be capable of yielding such a missile?
Well, I think by dint of the fact that we do believe that this is worth that we're going to submit a report, and we do believe that it's important for the council to take it up. That you can derive from that we do believe that these launches were using a technology that we believe, again, in keeping with the language of the resolution, would have permitted them the ability to deliver a nuclear weapon or nuclear weapon warhead. So we do believe that this technology was in keeping with that capability, and therefore we want to bring it up to the council.
Even if the particular missiles weren't at that time nuclear capable?
Correct. Again, it doesn't, and the resolution says that,
Right.
with ballistic missile technology capable of delivering nuclear weapons, that's the key.
The test, yep.
And we believe that these tests were in keeping with that capability.
Okay, thanks.
Change your subject.
Let me go over here, yeah.
Is Jason resumed in this building today? And then do you have anything on his meeting with the president and other officials here?
He was in the building today, mostly to meet with Brett McGurk. I know that the secretary dropped by, and I'm told that the president did as well briefly. I don't have a readout from those discussions, but I'm sure it was, they were, that both meetings were of a positive nature, welcoming him back and wishing him the very best. But I don't have a specific readout for it. Yeah.
John?
Yeah.
Hi. Yeah, thank you. I have a couple on Latin America. First, I wanted to ask about the nomination of Assistant Secretary Jacobson to be ambassador to Mexico. As you know, Senator Marco Rubio has been blocking her nomination. On Saturday, he said he will continue blocking her until she answers the questions he's asked of her. He mentioned her work on Cuba and Venezuela and the delay in formally requesting the extradition of El Chapo. And I wanted to know if the State Department has provided answers on those questions, if there's a problem there or none.
We have. We've answered all of the senator's questions, all of them, to include those two areas that you talked about, the extradition of El Chapo and Venezuela. And I would also add that the department has briefed the senator's staff repeatedly on issues that he has requested further information about since the hearing in July, which was 8 months ago. 8 months ago. We have also offered to provide any information that we can on any other subjects, as well as an offer to meet with Assistant Secretary Jacobson. The senator has declined that invitation. On the issues that the senator has raised in the press, I can tell you that we have conveyed to his staff a level of detail of information that goes beyond, in fact, well beyond, the original questions that he asked. Again, we hope that the Senate will call this to a vote and let the process itself, the process as it's supposed to play out, decide whether or not we're going to have an ambassador to Mexico to help promote and protect our interests there. Mexico's our third largest trading partner. We face energy, border, and security challenges together, and together we also confront narcotics trafficking as a significant issue. So we continue to believe we need an ambassador there in Mexico City to represent our interests. And this lengthy, unnecessarily lengthy hold has definitely hurt our ability to accomplish this. And we've said this many, many times. It's time to have a vote and make a determination. Obviously, we want the vote to lead to her confirmation and her installment there in Mexico City. The secretary, the president, stands firmly behind her nomination for this post. But it's time to have a vote. It's time to move the process forward. That's the way it's supposed to work.
Can I, wait, hold on. Can I just, very briefly on this?
Sure.
What did Senator Rubio decline? An offer to meet with her, or an offer for any more information?
To meet with
Did he give, I mean, he's been kind of busy lately, so one might understand why he
I would
wouldn't,
let-
not in Washington, or, I mean, he might have a lot more time after tomorrow, but does he, like, in principle, oppose to meeting with
I would let the senator's
Jacobson?
staff speak for that. All I can tell you is an offer was made to meet to address any other issues, any other questions outstanding, and that offer was declined.
Do you have anything?
Question, it's yes or no. I know that the secretary is traveling with the president to Cuba. He said in the past that he wanted to meet with the Colombian peace negotiators. Do you know if he's going to do that in this trip, or will
I
that
don't
be
have any
later?
updates at this point on the secretary's travel to Havana. He will be going as part, I think, as you know, of the president's delegation. If there are additional or separate agenda items for the secretary at the appropriate time, we'll announce those.
But
and
there
speak to
can
them.
be. It's not impossible.
I just don't have anything at
Okay.
this time to announce. Matt, did you have a follow-up?
I wanted to ask you about another nominee, Rose Scott Miller.
Okay, sure.
What do you have any idea? Excuse me, whether she's been scheduled for a hearing or what?
As I understand it, there's not a hearing required, confirmation hearing required for that position.
Okay.
But I do think she is going up to the Hill this week for a Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing.
John, can I ask you a question on the Ivory Coast attack?
Yeah, but actually, if you don't mind, I want to, Matt raised an issue that I do want to address. I want to take the opportunity, even though he didn't ask me, because you may have seen, I reacted on social media over the weekend to a story by one of your colleagues about some of the challenges to her qualifications. And I just want to make it clear that the United States Secretary, in particular, but the United States strongly supports her candidacy to be the new NATO Deputy Secretary General. She has impeccable credentials for that job, extensive experience in European security affairs. And as I alluded to in some of my social media interaction over the weekend, I mean, any suggestion that she has been anything other than completely forthcoming and honest with members of Congress about Russian activity with respect to the INF are just not based in fact, and actually are, as I said in my posting, an affront to her character and integrity. She served this country very well and honestly, and again, we believe she's we're proud of our nomination of her to this post. We believe she's the best candidate, and we want to see that move forward. So I appreciate it.
And John,
It's
what's
not,
the,
it's not, no, it's not a Senate confirmable position. Yes.
What can the State Department tell us about the Ivory Coast attack and the targeting of Western diplomats?
I've seen, so first of all, you saw our statement over the weekend, obviously, expressing condolences to all those affected by this terrorist act, this just terrible attack. And we've obviously reached out to Ivorian authorities to offer whatever assistance we can as they investigate this. At this point, I've seen no information and no indications that that it was targeted against Americans, either in general or specifically. I mean, I've seen some press reporting about a delegation that was down there in the region, but I've seen no indications that this was specifically timed or targeted for them.
And then,
But again, look, this needs to be investigated, and we need to let the investigators do what they got to do.
so this attack is also similar to the attack back in January in Burkina Faso against that hotel, and I believe the same Al Qaeda group AQIM is claiming responsibility. Can you talk about how serious the threat is from this particular Al Qaeda affiliate against Western targets, including hotels?
Well, this is a group, again, I want to let the investigators do their job and determine more specifically, who was responsible and what lessons can be learned from this. That said, broadly speaking, AQIM certainly remains a threat, and it's a group that we continue to monitor as closely as possible, and also a group that has proven capable of striking out against Western targets and has frankly espoused that as a goal, to keep striking at Western targets, whether they're American or European. So, I mean, we take it very seriously, and we're going to continue to work with regional and local authorities throughout the region to try to stem this threat. But obviously, it can be difficult to do. Yeah, Abby.
Can I go back to an earlier topic quickly? The reports of an American who was taken by the Peshmerga, would you be able to say procedurally if an American were captured in that manner, whether or not they would be brought back to the United States, or what would be the next step?
I'm not an expert on the process. Obviously, if and only if, Abby, because I'm not in a position to confirm these reports, but if an American decides to go fight for a terrorist group, and if he or she is apprehended in that and then handed over to U.S. authorities, and I won't speak for the Department of Justice, but there is a process there to hold them to account in the U.S. criminal justice system. Certainly, there would be a process for that, but again, I just don't have any additional information. I can't confirm the veracity of these particular reports.
I got two that are
I'm
very
afraid
good.
I've got to get going, so I'll take just you, and then that's going to be it.
Take me first.
Go ahead.
Thank you. British media report that President Obama is to visit the UK sometime in April to try to persuade the British public to vote to stay in the European Union when a referendum is held there in June. What would you say to people who might interpret the president's going there with that message as interference in the UK's internal affairs?
Look, I can't speak to the president's travel. You'd have to talk to my colleagues in the White House, but I can point you to what Secretary Kerry said. And we were in London not long ago. Obviously, these are decisions for the British people to make. We understand that and we respect that. But what we've said, we believe, in a strong UK and in a strong EU.
Is the administration going to advocate for the UK staying in the European
I'm
Union?
not going
as they
to,
go there?
again, I'm not going to speculate about presidential travel. All I can tell you is what the Secretary has said himself here in D.C. and in London. But we all obviously respect that these are decisions that the British people have to make for themselves.
I got two, they'll be brief. One is on Bahrain and the arrest. Are you aware of the arrest or renewed detention of a woman named Zainab al-Rawaja? and her infant
So
child.
Yes, we are aware of those
And
reports.
what have you said to the Bahrainis, if anything, about this?
What I can tell you is we're monitoring the situation there. And as before, we strongly urge the government of Bahrain to follow due process in all cases and to abide by its commitment to transparent judicial proceedings conducted in full accordance with Bahrain's international legal obligations. I can't speak to
Well, you called for her
specific-
release in the past, I believe. I mean, this is something that's happened again now to you.
Yeah, again, I think I'm going to leave it just where
All right.
I did for today.
All right,
Thanks,
and then,
everybody.
wait, I had one more, but I don't expect you to have an answer, so you're probably gonna take it, and this is not a joke question, this is a real question. So last year,
I
as you
never
remember,
take
a Chinese insurance company, Anbang, completed the purchase of the Waldorf Hotel in New York. And shortly after that happened, it was decided that the president and the State Department, and the secretary and the State Department would no longer use the Waldorf as its base or as their base in New York for the General Assembly. Well, Anbang has that same company has just offered $14 billion bid for Starwood Hotels Group. And I am wondering if this goes through, if the bid is accepted and if the chain is in fact sold, does that mean that U.S. officials will no longer stay at Starwood Hotels? That's my question.
Okay, I'll take it.
Thank you.
Thanks.